Hey everyone, welcome back. Cursed Deck Builder here, and we're making our way to 10,000 decks. Right now we've got a Tana Reyhan +1/+1 counter deck. This comes to us by Serves, who says it's a Voltron deck that synergizes with +1/+1 counters and Saprolites. So let's take a look at this deck, which once again, I'm going to post the deck list in the description of this video. And with that, you should be able to take a look alongside with me. And if it's helpful, I would take a look at the deck first, try to figure out what you would change or what you would recommend, and then see if you and I agree. So, Tana cares about damage done. She has Trample, which I really like, and seems to be the Voltron part of this Voltron +1/+1 counter deck, where we're going to grow Tana very large, swing out with her, and every time we hit, we're going to create a bunch of tokens. Reyhan would be the other half. It's going to be the part that gives us black, which is very powerful in a counter deck. And he's a lot more straightforward, comes in with 3+1/+1 counters, and whenever a creature you control dies or is put in the command zone, if it had one +1/+1 counter, you can put one or more, you can put that many counters on target creature. I do like this. Usually, Reyhan feels a little weak. He's a 3/3 for 3, and though it gives everything modular, if you're familiar with the ability, it does have a bit of a problem where you won't get enough bodies to make that work. But in a dedicated deck where we want Tana to have that ability, to be the one creating the Saprolings, this is particularly strong. So already off to a good start. I like that. And looking at creatures, looking at the other sections, we can already see at a glance we have a lot of what I would call the staple cards in a +1/+1 counter deck. You know, we look for stuff like Hardened Scales, we look for stuff like, where are you? Corpsejack Menace, we look for Retribution of the Ancients, Ozolith cards, which we have both right here. We already have a lot of the base here. So let's see where we can improve and create some consistency where the deck could use a little more. Now, something else that pops out to me immediately when I look at a deck is what we cordially call power level, right? When I see a card like Dockside Extortionist, I see Vampiric Tutor, I'm feeling a certain level of strength of the deck. Whoever you play with, you're prepared to be able to tutor deflecting swats here too. You're prepared for tutors. You're prepared for counter spell, counter magic, maybe even free counter magic, considering you have deflecting swat. So you are going quickly, and you want to be able to have a particularly strong presence against these opponents. I see Murderous Redcap. I'm assuming, yes, very clearly this is our infinite win combination. I'm sure Temur Sabertooth has another one with Dockside for infinite mana. So we have some ways to immediately go off and defeat our opponents should we need to, that way we can build into. So what's missing? So something that I notice is there is a mix of cards that I would consider not as strong on the whole as our infinite combos. I am talking about things like Scarland Thrinax, Scarland Thrinax, which sacrifices creatures to put a +1/+1 counter. Essentially, it's Carrion Feeder. Then further down, we can see Sprouting Thinrax, who also says whenever it dies, put 3/1/1 green Saproling creatures into play. Similarly, Bloodhall Ooze, which ideally on your upkeep, you play this turn one. On your upkeep, you get at least one +1/+1 counter, and then ideally you fetch for whatever remaining. Oh, right, this is permanent. This isn't land. I'm thinking of Nactil. So ideally, you play this turn one. Turn two, or a subsequent turn, you play a green-black permanent, and then every upkeep it gets two +1/+1 counters. Similarly, Ulash the Hate Seed, who comes in with counters, and you can pay mana to remove those counters in order to either create saprolings or deal 1 damage. So I'm going to suggest that these cards that I've just named are the weaker part of the deck, especially the Thrinax. My goodness, these lizards over here feel like they're there for an affection to Alara more than a strong part of the deck. I could be wrong. There could be a crazy combo that I'm not seeing here, but they're 3 colors. They come in with not what I consider threatening bodies, and though Scarland is definitely the stronger of the two, Sprouting just feels like a sacrifice outlet that is a poor impression of what your commander does by creating saprolings. So these are the cards immediately that I see that I kind of want to take out. After that, as if you've noticed when I look at decks, I go straight to the high mana cost ones. And Thromok, the Insatiable, is one that comes immediately that I see. Vigor, which is unfortunately not in English, so let me look up the English text on Vigor. Of course, there's quite a few. There we go. Vigor says if damage would be dealt to another creature, prevent that damage, put a +1/+1 counter for each 1 damage prevented this way. Okay. Yeah, I'm not too impressed by those. I think they both get like Thromok gets better with Reyhan on the battlefield because Thromok eats a bunch of creatures. You get to spread out the counters that were on those creatures onto other creatures, and then should Thromok be immediately destroyed, it's leave player. It dies. Okay, so it has to be killed. If Thromok is immediately killed, you can then spread those counters out again. I will suggest, though, at a higher power level table, the chances of that working out in your favor feel a bit lower. If you cast Thromok, you play it, and the Devour trigger comes onto the stack. If I have removal, I'm going to remove Reyhan immediately. Alternatively, if I have Swords to Plowshares, I'm going to wait for you to finish devouring. This is Michaeloth, but Michaeloth has a similar problem. I'm going to let you finish devouring, and then I'm going to exile Thromok, which will then remove the trigger. Now, the Ozolith also, because the Ozolith is better here because it says leaves the battlefield, but it's a similar situation where if someone has removal, they're going to be pointing it at the payoff, which is the Ozolith and Reyhan, and not so much the enabler, which is Thromok. So very, very quickly, I will say Michaeloth, same things. If the timing is bad, if your opponents have removal, you've spent 5 mana and sacrificed a bunch of tokens for nothing. And I love Michaeloth, so I am saying this from a place of love, but the power level of the deck does not match Michaeloth here. I think part of the idea here is that you have very strong payoffs, but some of your enablers are a little higher mana than I would particularly like, and it would be nice to bring down that mana cost a little more. Very quickly seeing the rest. Craterhoof Behemoth is great. I have no problem with that, especially if you're going wide with Saprolings. Vorinclex Voice of Hunger stands out a little bit. You have ramp, but I don't think you have what I would consider a large enough amount of ramp that I would consider Vorinclex very playable. You're at the point of ramp that, in my mind, if I wanted Vorinclex in this deck, I would be considering how to reanimate Vorinclex, which, as far as I can see, you aren't playing any reanimate effects. 8 mana is a lot, and 8 mana is a lot um, for your opponents to immediately want to stop Vorinclex from happening. Once again, I'm trying to keep it in the vision of I am assuming that the power level of your deck matches the power level of your opponents. And at this level, it is not so much removal, as in kill or exile effects. I'm more concerned about counter spells against Vorinclex because the benefit is if you if you play Vorinclex and your opponent taps out to Beast Within it, you at least get to I guess it's stun now is the word, but you get to freeze or stun three of their lands, assuming they use lands, and at least you get some benefit there. However, if this gets counterspelled, you're in the hole pretty bad. You've got nothing for 8 mana, and your opponent hasn't even been punished for doing so. Very quickly, looking at the higher mana cost, Eldrazi Monument stands out here. I really like Eldrazi Monument. I feel like this is on the edge. Now, let me look at Two-Handed Axe again. Double its power, gains double strike. This is cute. I wouldn't tell you to take it out. I think it's cute. I think it's fine, especially with Tana having trample, its ability to potentially one-shot a player. That's real, so keep that. But Eldrazi Monument is a large investment that the the stars have to kind of align for it to pay off on a high power cube. It's really a cube. Sorry, table. It's really, really strong should your opponents be interacting with you on the level of board clears and creature defense. If all you need to do is swing out and defeat your opponent, Eldrazi Monument is very, very strong. It also obviously works with the sacrifice effect with Reyhan and the Saprolinks to sacrifice from Tana. So I see the inclusion here. I see the fact that it gives evasion across the board. Tana doesn't need it, but I do get that the rest do. But I feel like the space it's competing with in this deck is with Craterhoof Behemoth. I don't think you're casting this for the indestructibility. I think you're casting this for the damage and the guaranteed evasion across the board. And so if that's what you want, I would consider another Craterhoof Behemoth effect, one of the boars, or there's a ram. I would consider one of those first before I would consider Eldrazi Monument. Now, those are all the cards that mainly stand out. I like Blasphemous Act here, obviously, because you get to you yourself bring it to the necessary number, and with a card like the Ozolith in play, you don't mind it as much to wipe your own board. I'm going to look very quickly because I figure some of the things I might want to talk about might be in here. So Winding Constrictor obviously comes to mind. I think just having another token adder is very, very good. You are looking to hit a a critical amount of tokens on Tana that when she attacks, you get the benefit of maybe putting an opponent close to death by commander damage, and to have a large army coming out of it, a large amount of saprolings. And Winding Constrictor is one of those cards that you can play as setup beforehand, so that when you play Tana, you wait a turn cycle, and then you drop a bunch of +1/+1 counters on her. You feel particularly like this will push you a little further ahead, which is really nice. I'm going to see if there's anything else that jumps out to me. Okay, Shadow Spear, I would very much so agree with Shadow Spear. Swiftfoot Boots, I'm not against. Not having haste here does feel like a bit of a loss. Enchantments, these are fine. Okay, we'll come back to Glisten as well. So, what would I suggest here? I think the first thing I would like to say while it's on my mind. So if I can spell Drawbridge, Crashing Drawbridge is a good haste enabler that will enable all your creatures to have haste. And then Concurrent Crossroads has a similar effect where it will give haste across the board. And I do particularly like that. Because I think you can make a lot of bodies and a lot of strength fast. And you have a lot of creatures, like when you replay Tana, I think you want to be able to attack with her immediately to get that effect and start building your board. So haste is a very strong effect here. Then the next thing, just in terms of mana, something I've said before, I don't even need to show you. I think you'll know what I'm talking about. You've got mana ramp at Nature's Lore, Cultivate, Sky Shroud's Claim. I think that's it. Farseek as well. And in rocks, you have nothing. And in creatures, I think Dockside Extortionist, though I don't often consider this card as ramp. It's more of a combo piece most of the time, but we'll count him in there. And Gala Greeters very slowly is ramp. I wouldn't mind some more ramp. I think, namely, there's always that 2 mana creature, Gyre Sage. That's the one. Gyre Sage is really nice with +1/+1 counters and is a hefty ramp, but it is not so much the amount I'm looking for, it's the mana cost. Incubation Druid would be another. And then, of course, the Signets and Rampant Growth style effects are all at 2 mana. Once again, if you've seen any of my videos before, you may know that I like certain CMCs for your ramp so that you can hit certain goals. And a very strong goal here is Tana on turn 3. You want to be able to play Tana quickly, and then you want to be putting +1/+1 counters onto her after most of the time. Things like Grum Gully are nice because they allow Tana to come in with counters, but I think a lot of the other times, I'm just thinking now, I should be keeping track of how many things directly put counters on her, and maybe it's a little less than I'd like. Okay, let's come back to that. Regardless, let's look at your curve, especially on outside, on your creatures, on your permanents, like creatures, enchantments, artifacts. We can tell very quickly that some of your most powerful enchantments and artifacts are at 1 mana. You have okay cards at 2, but the real stuff starts at 3 and beyond. So, with this in mind, outside of spending your first few turns tutoring, like Vampiric Tutor into Demonic Tutor or Vamp Tutor into Farseek, which is something I wouldn't mind something like that, you're not really doing much. I think being able to have a few more ramp cards at 2, and at this level, I could say 1. There's the 1 mana Enchant Forest. Uh, let's go by mana value. Utopia Sprawl. Utopia Sprawl is 1 mana ramp, and there's not a lot of it. So I would definitely put something. It's hard to interact with, so I would do that. You could consider creatures as well, but I don't want to suggest that yet. Right now, what I want to say is a few more pieces of 2 mana ramp can pull you into Tana a lot easier. Whereas Sky Shroud Claim, I don't know when you want to cast this. I'm trying to think of a lot of hands you open with this deck, and I want you to think about at what point are you willing to tap out to play this over a number of other plays. Like you have a lot of very strong plays, whether it be just setup, such as dropping your enchantments or your artifacts that interact with +1/+1 counters, or putting out your sacrifice outlets, or around that mana cost, either of your commanders. So at what point do you play Sky Shroud Claim? And I feel like it's when you're stuck on 4 mana or where you're stuck on 5 mana and you're trying to get a little higher. Otherwise, you're not incentivized to cast Sky Shroud Claim on curve. So I would definitely lower the mana cost, replace this with a different card so that you can get to the numbers you want to faster. I think as well, I wouldn't mind Ashnod's Altar as your sacrifice outlet over the lizard because it's harder to interact with, it's just more reliable, it's mana ramp, and it is an outlet for all your saprolands. Now here's the difficult one. I have noticed, and I'm not sure what the solution here is. It's weird. I'm looking at this and I'm like, how hard is it to put counters onto Tana? Because I see a lot of things that interact with +1/+1 counters, And I think, okay, so I think what's happening here is your main way of putting the counters onto Tana is Reyhan and Ozolith, right? You have a few cards like Silk Guard, you have a few cards like Snakeskin Veil, those kind of cards. You have really not much. You have ways like I see Grumgully, Mazarek, which is way too much mana to start putting counters on it. Flesh and Blood. Flesh is 5 mana as well. So you seem to be a little low for my taste of putting counters onto Tana. And I feel like a few of them, like Rhythm of the Wild as well, Civil Unrest as well. These are cards that either come after Tana or they come right before Tana. I think if you want to be quick and you want to have Tana as your main threat, you want to play her turn 3 and then you want to put the counters on after. Because alternatively, let me think what the dream is. The dream is you go Hardened Scales into Ozolith's Shattered Spire, into Grumgully, into Tana. So what does that do? Tana comes in, Grumgully wants to put 1+1+1 counter, Hardened Scales adds a second, and the Ozolith's Shattered Spire adds a third. Now, I'm not saying this as the most broken start your deck can do, but outside of some kind of shenanigans with using Dockside Extortionists to get more mana than you could, even with Soul Ring, because how much colors you need to use these abilities, at most you can then maybe Silk Guard an extra time for another 3 counters to put Tana into like a 10/10, and that feels like a lot of effort for not a lot of gains. Tana doesn't have haste, you have to wait a turn cycle, she's vulnerable. So what I'd rather have you do is I'd rather you pull out Tana early and then put counters onto her after the fact. Now there's a few cards that can do that. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to suggest that's the direction that you should go. I'm also looking at the last ones I'm going to try to suggest. Helena Partner. Helena's good here. Beginning of combat on your turn, put these counters, give haste. This is very strong both before and after Tana. And then Rishkar also will put +1/+1 counters after the fact onto Tana and enable a lot of your Saprolings to tap for mana. But I think what I'm seeing here, you introduced this deck as a +1/+1 counter in Saproling tech, and it feels a lot more like a pseudo token aristocrats deck with +1/+1 counters on the side. And the distinction I'm making here is that it feels like your primary interaction points are getting +1/+1 counters by creatures dying or being sacrificed, as opposed to creatures coming in, giving +1/+1 counters, and additionally, you can sacrifice them for additional value. I hope that makes sense. I know maybe that's splitting hairs a bit, but it does change the shape of your deck. I think that's I think that's where I'm gonna end here because I've gone for a while. But I do like a lot of this deck. I want to see the curve reduce just a little bit in the sense of the ramp so that you can get to your middle game faster. I want to see maybe one or two more ways to add counters and especially onto Tana, and I wouldn't mind some haste. With that, I think it allows you to get that initial hit in with Tana. That's going to be really important because after that initial hit, the rest of your deck is going to be very functional. After that initial hit, you've got creatures to eat, you've got creatures to put +1/+1 counters on. Um, Grumgully goes from being an okay card that puts 1 counter onto your commander into a card that boosts your board because you've just dropped 5 Saprolings and now they're at least 2/2s. So it really does feel like your deck goes off after that first hit. So I want you to work at ensuring that first hit happens through ramp, through haste, and tailoring your deck so that Tana can get that first hit. I hope this was helpful. I really like your deck. I'm a big fan of any aristocrat strategy, any token strategy, and these colors. So this is a really nice mix. I really like Reyhan here. I find Reyhan is very underused, and I think this is the exact kind of deck I love seeing him in. I think it's a him, but regardless, this is a very strong deck, and I think I'm very impressed with the direction it's been taken in. And I think and I would like to see the next draft. If you create another draft, please send it to me. I've got a form in the video description. If you have any other decks for me to see, please send it along in the on the form. I will get to it when I can. I have a bit of a backlog, so it'll be a bit, but not too long because not too many people have sent yet, and I want to see decks like this more often. Strong decks that just need a directional shift as opposed to me telling you exactly you're missing on playing one really good card. All right, good luck.